Hello, I'm Bruce Zimmerman, and this is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week. Now, in our gardens, particularly here in Niagara, April showers, which are supposed to bring Mayflowers, well, the Mayflowers are showing up, and the plants are slowly coming to life, but the dryness has caused a lot of pain in the garden. Then it is starting to warm up, and then with very high temperatures, a lot of plants are forcing themselves up when the ground is still dry. So we're going to have some issues with the garden. My southern magnolia trees are burned. Now, normally they always defoliate, you lose your older leaves, etc. Well, they've almost completely defoliated simply because dry, even though I've watered, and even though the temperatures are reasonable. Now, it was a very cold winter, so they may have suffered as well. Frost went very, very deep, and possibly the ground was still frozen while the wind and the sun were warming up the leaves. So we've lost almost all of the leaves off of those. So we'll have to sit and wait and see how they fare this spring. The daffodils came up almost on time, and of course they didn't last very long. When you start getting 70, 80 degree temperatures at the beginning of May, and it's a late season and all these bulbs are starting into bloom, they sort of finish quickly. The tulips that are normally May tulips are up, they're in bloom, and they're going to finish fairly quickly, simply because of the very high heat. And even though rain is predicted for the next few days, it's not an awful lot, and the temperature is still going to be very high. The rain will be sporadic. It will not be a soaking rain, and so the plants are going to suffer again and continue to suffer for moisture. Containers. I've put out some containers and brought them out as I normally do. Now, in this, I store my summer bulbs. These are non-hardy bulbs which go in the pots and go into the garage for the winter and come back out for the spring. Great. Let's see. They are starting to shoot, particularly some of the oxalis, which are really quite tough, and the pineapple lilies. The Mexican shellflowers are not showing any signs yet, but that's not unusual. They do have a tendency to show up a little later anyways as the temperatures climb and they get warmed up. My clematis are doing spectacularly in the containers. I've lifted them out of the vegetable garden where I sink them each year in the containers, and I grow them in containers. These are container clematis. The clematis that are above the ground for the winter, they're okay. The species ones still died back quite heavily, but are breaking leaf and doing quite well. The less hardy and the large flowered clematis have suffered quite a bit. The English ivies have all burned. A lot of them will have died back. Now, yes, this is the northern range for English ivy outside, but even the Baltic ivy has burned again. That's 2 years in a row in the wintertime where the Baltic ivy, English ivies have suffered badly. So we'll wait and see. The brunarias are all in bloom, so they look like forget-me-nots. And, of course, the variegated ones with the green and white foliage, or the frosty ones where you've got the silver and green, are in bloom, and they look very effective. The Helleborus, believe it or not, are still in bloom and doing very well. Both the Niagara, the white, and some of the newer pinks as well. Hostas are popping up out of the ground, and they're showing their eyes and breaking into leaf, despite the fact that they do like moisture and respond. Now, I have watered a few of them in order to encourage them, but many of them are still slow to pop their heads out of the ground. Ferns that I thought had not made it are starting to show up. Some of the more tender ferns. The old male ferns are starting to throw fiddleheads, but not very many. So again, why slow? Ornamental grasses are really slow to sort of pump up their heads in the new growth, except, of course, for the invasive species like the red barren bloodgrass, right? So we'll see. Sedums, the purple sedums, the green sedums, they're all doing quite well. The daylilies are all up. The Siberian iris are just spectacular in the fact that they're green and they're way ahead of everybody else in the garden. And so we'll probably have a good year for them. Maybe it's just because of their overall hardiness. That's maybe the reason. Hydrangeas. It's across the board. I've got hydrangeas the rabbits attacked. And, of course, they're coming back slowly from the ground, but only from the ground. Others that the rabbits left alone, either they died to the ground, or they tip-died, or they didn't die at all. Like Tiny Tough Stuff, you'd swear it was perfect, right? No death, no setbacks, no rabbits, but also the Freedoms, the Dancing in the Moonlight series, they all suffered a little bit. Lace caps, if it was on the west side of the garden, spectacular, perfect. On the east side of the garden, the rabbits and lack of warmth, I guess, I don't know why, but they have suffered badly. Even the same variety from one side to the other. Why? Who knows? The espalier apple tree, the rabbits with the high snow were able to come along and nibble on the lower tier of my Fulford Gala espaliered apple. So it's been trimmed back by the rabbits, but also by me to help shape and hopefully bring back the lower tiers. I may have to go and actually start a new tier. We'll see. It'll be a long time before it goes. Because I put a lot of protection on my cut-leaf Japanese maple, it did very well. It always has a tendency to lose a few leaves and a few branches. So in the wintertime, and that means go in and, of course, prune out the dead. They're very susceptible to dead branches causing rot and setting them back and eventually killing the tree. So good pruning practices on Japanese and cut-leaf Japanese maples is critical. Hollies have done very well. In fact, my blue hollies just never look back. They're spectacular. The yews, all of them are great except for the one facing south. It burned on the south side and the west side and the east side, but not on the north side because, of course, it's against the building. So you sort of knock off all the foliage that's turned brown. It all falls off, and you know that it's going to regenerate because it's a yew. Japanese yews will regenerate from old wood. The pagoda dogwood trees, the variegated ones that I moved last year, have not suffered at all. The hostas that I put in near them have not suffered. I was a very bad boy, and I lifted the daffodils that had not bloomed in a clump, and of course got them out because they had been overtaken by the cotoneaster ground cover, and that was a cranberry cotoneaster. And it's doing very well, breaking out nicely. It never got set back either. But the daffodils are now all replanted in the backyard from the front yard into 3 different clumps and have recovered quite nicely from being, well, I hate to admit it, moved bare root. And with a little water, little care, and the warmth, they seem to be doing very, very well. They're not exactly standing up tall and straight in the foliage, but, of course, the foliage is turgid, and many of them are starting to stand up. And, of course, being so long, because they were they splayed out to get up through the taller cotoneaster ground cover, they flopped over anyway. So doing quite well. A lot of the miscanthus and the grasses are slow to start, and I have to admit, I'm sort of looking like I was going to divide this and I was going to divide that one, and now I'm not too sure whether I'm going to wait another year and then decide to divide some of the tougher of the miscanthus. They seem to be doing okay, but I think after 2 hard winters, the centers on the older ones, which are supposed to be like donuts, I mean, they do die out in the middle like most perennials. What they did was they died out even more than in just the center. Whole sides died out, whole centers died out, maybe both died out and had to be cleaned up. So they look more like the shape of a horseshoe as opposed to a donut. My Zelkovia is doing very well. It's broken out into leaf, it's finished flowering. And the seedlings that have come up in it that I potted up and sunk into my vegetable garden, actually, most of them all survived. They looked like they would never survive. They're so thin and delicate, but they have done very well. Hardy orange tree seedlings have done well. Most of them have burned a little bit on the edges and on the leaves. The old dead mother, who has been in my garden for now, this is going to be the 2nd year. The little birds love to play in her. It's a protection. So I'll leave her for another year, and we'll see what happens. Someday I will cut her down, but the birds love to play in there and romp. They get protected by the big blind spurs and from other big birds and squirrels, etc. They don't nest there. They rest there. They play there, and it's fun to watch as well. So while you're out in your garden, take a look and watch the animals, the birds that play without doing damage, mind you, in your garden. So remember, yes, gardening is a lot of fun and a lot of work, but don't forget to stop and enjoy it. I'm Bruce Zimmerman. This is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week.